Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and I have today Catherine Counihan, and she is a psychotherapist over in London. I've been following her on Instagram for a while, and we've been trying to meet for about 6 months off and on. And so I'm really excited to have you today. Some of the things we're going to cover are trauma. She works with people a lot on a lot of different things in family trauma. And so we're going to get into that and kind of hear her story, and we hope it helps you guys. So Cath, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Clint. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely.
So where should I start? What do you want to hear about? I mean, I can tell you about
how
my
did
career.
tell me a little bit about how you grew up and what kind of led you to being a psychotherapist, and as much of that as you want to tell.
Okay, so I guess I think it's Beatrice Beebe, and she says that research is me search.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that that's really true for many of us. So I was drawn to psychotherapy because of the dysfunction in my own family and because of how much therapy helped me. I grew up in South Africa. I'm the eldest of 4 children. We had another brother who died, though. And my parents, my dad was a doctor, but also an alcoholic. And that really kind of clouded our whole family, having addiction in the family.
Yeah.
And but there was a lot of silencing and shame.
Ooh.
So kind of just acting like everything was kind of shiny on the outside, even though it was kind of chaotic in the inside. And I think that high functioning alcoholism is really, really common. Well, I mean, I know that it's really, really common. But often we don't know the impact of things until we kind of look back.
Hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a couple of things happened in my brother dying. So that for my parents, that was kind of a catastrophe, having a child who died when they were a baby, and of cot death. And that was kind of shoved under the carpet, I think. It was 1979, so I was 3. They didn't have any therapy. They pretty much had a baby really quickly after that. And my dad's drinking really picked up. And my mother was very, very depressed.
Mm-hmm.
But always there was this difference between appearance and reality. And I think that's a really common theme with trauma, that what goes on in the family home is quite secret and comes with a lot of shame. And everyone kind of colludes to keep it quiet,
right,
basically. And so that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about is like honesty and breaking down shame.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for new parents and for people who've been through trauma, I think, because our tendency is so often to silence ourselves and to somehow think we're bad. Because, when you grow up with addiction, there's always a core of shame in the family. And I really want to kind of break that down for me and for everyone, because I think that once we can all see how we are all good enough, we're all created by this, we're all amazing actually, but we don't think that, basically. So I don't know why I'm saying basically so much, but anyway, so then I guess in my family, part of the drive to looking shiny and normal was a lot about having clever children. So we were very, our results were always really important, our school results.
Uh-huh.
And we focused a lot on that. And that seemed to kind of contribute to this idea that everything was really good and sort of shiny. And
so the outside self didn't really reflect the inside state of what was going on, right?
Yeah, no. There was a lot of kind of cognitive dissonance between the outside.
Right. Which is another typical pattern for addiction or something in the family is,
Yeah, exactly. And I love I'm a firm believer that addiction is very much related to childhood trauma, and that it's all about affect dysregulation and attachment trauma, essentially. Yep. And it's really helped me to look back at my dad's childhood, actually, and at his parents' childhoods, and to see how some of these patterns were kind of inescapable, and that his own abandonment trauma meant that he didn't have enough capacity to regulate his emotions, and he had no idea how to do things. And being a doctor in some sense gives you a front of almost being like godlike in some way, that you can fix everything.
Yeah.
Ironically. And actually there's a lot of addiction often with doctors, either prescription meds or drinking.
Yeah. Surgeons especially, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's very ironic, but that's a bit of a deviation. But then,
Was that what your dad was?
no, an obstetrician and a gynecologist, and then he retrained to do occupational health.
Okay.
So mines and foundries and like steelworks and things like that.
Gotcha.
Then I guess over time, I was the eldest child, and often the eldest child takes on the role of, dealing with the parent. And I was the one who spent my whole life trying to just come up with the perfect speech to convince him not to drink, to have his 5 fruit and vegetables a day. And if he just had his 5 fruit and vegetables a day, then maybe he wouldn't drink, and our family could be better, because it kind of eats away at the core of the family, really. But somehow my mother didn't seem to have enough of her own kind of energy to kind of fight him. So I was always the one who was angry and fighting with him.
Yeah.
And sort of shouting
would you say resiliency?
I don't know if she was. I think she also had a core of shame. So she came from a family who were very focused on kind of keeping up with the Joneses, and making sure you had a nice, like your tea set and what your house looked like, or things like that were more important than kind of actually what was going on. And so I think that she just wanted to kind of keep it hidden, because admitting that there's alcoholism, because we link like what's going on to our core self, we think it's about us.
Right.
And so it feels better to just try and hide it. And I think she didn't have enough shame resilience, so maybe she didn't have enough resilience to kind of deal with it, and to also just be an adult, because I wish she'd left my dad, basically.
Right. Well, you think that's because, she's acting out of the inner child attachment wounds, and so she didn't have enough like maturity in her emotions to kind of stand up for herself, set boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting for all of us, because you and I have the luxury of being in the first generation where we go to psychotherapy and deal with this stuff, right? So it's like this battle of 2 truths at the same time, which is, man, I'm so frustrated that my parents didn't get therapy and didn't get help, and their parents didn't, and now we're suffering because of all this generational trauma. And at the same time, like, there was no one for them to go to. So how bad would that be, right? Like, how bad would it be if me and you are in the same place that we are, with all the problems that we've probably worked through in therapy and are working through, and our kids are blaming us, and we're like, well, where do you want me to get help? And so I think it's such a crazy time in life where, I mean, obviously how you're talking about it, one, shows you're a healthy professional, and also shows the work you've done in therapy to be able to put yourself in their shoes and have the insight into, oh man, they had some really rough stuff too. And it's not about me, and it's not about my worth and value. And honestly, it's not about theirs either. No. But that's part of the problem, right? Is that they never realized that.
No, they never realized that. And I think that, particularly for women, divorce, my mother converted to being Catholic. Actually, my father was from like a strict Catholic family. My mother converted religion and married him. And Catholicism says, divorce is no longer a sin, but it comes with so much shame. And even though, they did actually get divorced in the end because of something my father did, but that was only in 2003, so really quite recently. But still, my mum held a lot of shame about it. And it takes a long time to kind of separate yourself out from the things that have happened to you and your sense of self-worth. Mm-hmm. And I think that she didn't have a good grounding of that in her own childhood. So, she didn't have that. And also, we don't know, all this, the attachment theory and John Bowlby's work and Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main and all those people was kind of the 1960s, but we haven't had brain, like neuroscience and brain research that kind of backs up all that work until like the 1990s. So
it's wild. We're not that far. We're not that far removed from it. Like, we act like we're so smart.
Yeah. And also, it's so new that our parents didn't have access to any of this information. So I think that, like, my own children have connected me much more to my childhood pain in ways I could never have imagined.
Amen.
Because they asked me that. Yeah. And that's I think, the pain of parenting, really. But I had a brother who died at 3, And he died of cot death. And I think that they just took him out of the house. They took him to the hospital. I never saw him again. I didn't get to like kiss him goodbye or, look at the dead body or anything. And my own children say to me, did you get to say goodbye to him? What happened that day? Who talked about it? And I'd never thought about that. I'd never thought about like, oh my word, that day I would have woken up a 3-year-old. I would have been overjoyed about this baby brother. And then they've just gone. And I don't think that they had any, now we are so kind of empathic with children, and we understand about emotions, and we know that they are so in tune with everything. So we would sit down and explain everything, but I think there was literally nothing.
Well, yeah.
And so that
you would have,
yeah.
Right. And that's the difference is like what I'm saying. And why I'm glad you're here is, still there are millions of people who still think the way they did 20 years ago. They still don't have access to the brain and the body and the parenting. And that's what's sad to me is, when I work with people in church, especially just trying to educate them on what I call God's general revelation. It's like, well, we have the science that shows how God made us and the consequences of sin and brokenness and how that's affecting all these things. So let's try to parent a child based on like their developmental stage, like what they can learn, what they can't learn, how they best learn, how they best regulate, and based on their own story, their own testimony of like how you've raised them, instead of like there are these little machines that we just like behavior modify all the time and train them into whatever. And it's still a problem. So
it's a massive problem, I think. And like we need to get that knowledge that attachment is a neurobiological system out into the world, into every, like forget about which crib you're going to buy, which pram or stroller or whatever. That's like literally in the who cares category. It's much more important to teach parents, I think, about like that.
So good.
Like that, like the attachment stuff is so important, and how much their own attachment wounds will be triggered. Because I think that's why there's so much shame in parenting, because parents are like, what have I done? Like, how come I'm so bad at this? Or how come I've got these feelings that I've never experienced,
Yeah, they've been shoved down for like 40 years,
Yeah, exactly. Shoved down. And so it kind of explodes in your life, basically. And it's kind of like what's gone on. But I didn't actually finish your first question, so let me quickly wind that up.
This is great. No, I love
how
it.
I got into therapy. So basically, I left South Africa when I was about 23. I think basically I kind of left my family because I couldn't cope with my role anymore and with the dysfunction and also the lack of honesty, I think, around having this addiction and all trying to cover it up and everything. And I moved to London, and then I worked in financial services because I thought that was a clever career and that I needed to do something that was clever because that was important to my family. And over time, I knew I wasn't happy. I kind of had disastrous relationships and overworked and shopped. I had a massive, so I also have addiction issues, but they're not in drinking. I mean, I don't drink, but I was a big shopper. That was one of the ways that I regulated myself.
Oh, man.
In a big work.
Amazon's done a work on some people for sure.
Yeah. Or just the internet generally.
Yeah, for sure.
But, and then two big things happened in my life. Both my parents died within a year of each other. And kind of my whole life fell apart. And all the kind of, I was really a codependent caretaker, and everything, all the things that I'd been doing to kind of keep myself like functioning in some way were kind of ripped from me. And there was quite a lot of kind of tragedy, and it was just all a bit disastrous. And therapy really helped me with that. I'd had quite a lot of therapy before, but no one had ever pieced together the addiction, the trauma, and the attachment stuff. Mm-hmm. And kind of to see why self-abandonment was so familiar to me, why I continue to do that, why I continue to people please, why I continue to like perfectionism. And then I learned so much more. There's like whole books written about adult children of alcoholics and adult daughters of alcoholics, actually. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And I found that really comforting, actually. And therapy really changed my life. It changed everything. And financial services were just going to eat my soul, I think, if I carried on working there, because it was just kind of, they pay you a lot of money, but they're not paying you a lot of money because it's enjoyable. They're paying you a lot of money because you're enduring something. And so I retrained when I was still working there. And yeah, I feel very blessed every day to do much of this work and to like walk alongside my clients. It's really special work.
Yeah, well, your story is amazing, and I appreciate you being so vulnerable and telling it. It's very, very similar to my own story, and childhood trauma and divorce. And it's funny you were saying, that experience, because my oldest is 8.5 and my parents divorced about 8.5. And so I'm in this season right now where I'm like, walking into the kitchen to see him or going to do something. Last night, he wakes me up at 4 this morning and he's like, "Hey, Dad, my covers are all messed up and I can't fix them. Come help me." And I'm like, "I want to kill you, but I love you." So I go in there, and cover him back up and fix his covers. And, my brain's like, "You can't do this yourself," give him a kiss and I go back to sleep. Of course, I didn't say any of that. And I'm like walking to the back to the bedroom thinking, my parents sat me down. Like, could I imagine going in and waking him up tomorrow and going, "Hey, listen, I'm leaving. We don't love each other anymore. And, whatever the story is, see you every 2 weeks, once a weekend." Like, even saying that out loud makes me want to throw up. It's like, and that's, you're right. Like in that constant tension. And again, my parents know, and we've talked about all this stuff, and I've forgiven them and worked through all that, and know they have their own story and their own problems, and I have no judgment or criticism for them now. But even though I've worked through all that in therapy, like you were saying, in the moment, this stuff still comes up in your body and still comes up in your heart. And you're just like, oh man, like this is what I was going through at 8.5. And it's we're not prepared for that sometimes. Now I know it's coming. So like I've been working on that in therapy for 2 years. Like, hey, in a couple of years, your kid's going to be your age when you're going through this, And I think that's such an important role of therapy, is not just dealing with it in the crisis, but so much of the prevention of looking ahead and going, okay, there are going to be seasons that you have in your teenage years where you lost your virginity or you had this sexual trauma happen, or in your college years where this thing happened. Help you be ahead of it, because your kids are going to be that age and it's going to bring it back up. And so what are you going to think about it? What do you believe about it? How are you going to process that? What supports are you going to use? And it sounds like you're doing all that. Awesome. So, which I'm sure informs what you do now. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think like hearing what you just said about, I think divorce is such a tragedy. And I don't think we actually talk enough about that in terms of how impactful it is on kids, because it's so common.
Never.
And it is a catastrophe for the child.
Yeah, I think it's one of the worst traumas you can go through as a human being, is to have these primary caregivers who are supposed to model pretty much all healthy relationships for your entire life, go, it's over, and especially if you're younger. I mean, it's hard if you're a teenager and adult too, but when you're younger and it's not taught to you, even if they tell you it's not your fault, you can't help but you've already probably been playing in that system, like you and I, the fixers and the helpers, for years. Yeah. So you can say it's not your fault, but I've already been blaming myself for 5 years. So this is just the inevitable ending of a thing that I already think my responsibility I have for it anyway.
Yeah. And then we think we haven't done it well. Like, how come we couldn't fix this? And that's really devastating. Really devastating.
And you bring that into your future relationships and into your marriage. And, I don't know about you, but even me in marriage, sometimes I'm like, I go from self-deprecation to trying to figure, it's just this dance of like checking in with myself and going, this is not everything's your fault, but what is your fault? And just that need to like save everything is difficult. And now I'm like, well, I have to tell myself, where that's coming from. That's mom and dad issues. That's trauma issues. And find some truth and get calm and, but it stays with you. And that's the other thing we don't talk about, is how the consequences of divorce all the way into adulthood, with grandkids, watching your kids suffer because of your parents' divorce.
Yeah, it's true. And often if there's estrangement in terms of the divorce and the parents don't speak to each other or they won't be in the same room, it's got repercussions always for as long as they live. And it's so kind of, so stressful. And so, all future kind of big family events have the potential to be ruined in some way if you have to kind of have 2 different rooms for people to be in, or any, there's just so many complexities around the actual practicalities of life.
Yeah.
When aiming at these estrangement. But I think you're so right about what comes up in our bodies and what, like, the ages that happen, the seasons when things happened. If they got divorced in the summer, sometimes, like I remember summer holidays not being great because there was so much drinking and all being a bit disastrous. And so I often found myself sort of inexplicably like quite sad in summer. And it took me a long time to figure out, oh yeah, that's old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the story now. Because otherwise we can go into this like labeling of what's wrong with me. Why am I like this? There's like, I should be on a lot of medication, or I've got tons of issues. And actually, I think that we need so much softness for ourselves, so much tending to ourselves, and so much self-compassion.
Yeah, which, you have this new podcast. Can you talk about that? Is that, because that's what I got out of your podcast, is Grow Yourself Up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I loved that. That was one of the things that drew me to you, was just that constant, I call it reparenting yourself.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just like, so, I mean, we're kind of getting into that, but how do you help people, or maybe what are some of the things that you're working on now, or that help them when they have, I think a lot of people who I work with and that listen to this and they message me have really difficult relationships with their adult parents as adults. So what are some of the things that you see in that are kind of the more difficult things that you're helping people navigate?
Well, I think there's a huge range of that in terms of the relationship with the parents and how much responsibility the parents have taken. Like, best case scenario is the parents go to therapy at some point themselves and can see the impact they had. Because I think one of the common things I notice with parents who are emotionally immature or abusive or narcissistic is that they don't see their child as a separate being who needs to be nurtured and loved and cared for. The child is like part of them, and it's just there for their needs. So kind of there is an extension of them to make them feel good.
Yeah. I talk with people all the time to help them understand that you're an adult, but your parent didn't have a solid identity and their worth and their value. They didn't feel loved. They didn't feel safe. So when they had you to make them feel good, right? They had you to put out into the world and be a reflection of who they are, because they didn't have a firm identity. And if they're still doing that in your 40s and 50s, it's a major problem and so hurtful, but you're so used to it your whole life that you don't know what to do.
No, and often it feels disloyal. People are like, oh, I can't cut them out. I can't have a no contact boundary, because it's so devastating, because we are also then left with no sense of self. Because if we grow up being like, it's almost like we're kind of held in like a kind of a rope around us, instead of being demarcated as a separate person and being taught, that concept of mentalization, where you're in my mind, I know you're a separate person with your own mind and your own viewpoints, and you're totally separate to me. But like dysfunctional parents or toxic parents or whatever, or however you want to label, they don't have that concept. It's just, you are here to make me feel good. So there's always that thing about, if the child comes and says, I feel sad about something, or I didn't like it when you did that, the parent then turns it back on themselves and like, I can't hear your distress. You're making me really distressed. And then the child gets pulled into then rescuing the parent.
Yep.
It's such a kind of common dance, actually, unfortunately, because it seems to be almost embedded in some cultures. But so I guess I try and help my clients work with where their parents are. If they have gone to therapy and they can see what damage they caused and take responsibility for that, that's really amazing. But most often the scenario I see is that it's really difficult to put in a no contact boundary, and there's that sense of disloyalty.
Yeah. So what's that? So what would you say would be a reason for a no contact boundary?
Well, I think that's very much up to the individual to decide.
Sure.
In terms of, that expression, I think it's from 12 Step, but when we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Mm-hmm. And I think that, unfortunately, because there's always a part of us who's wishing that somehow this could be different, we like return to the scene of the crime, as it were, to try and find a different ending.
Yep.
And but sometimes it takes many times to say goodbye, and we have to go back and relearn the lesson like multiple times. But and I think that we have to be really gentle with ourselves around that, because there's that like kernel of hope of this might be different this time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, any reason, like continuing abuse, undermining you verbally or anyway, trying to undermine your parenting, trying to set your children against you. You know, some narcissistic parents do that, where they try and kind of capture the grandparents and the grandchildren. And I've had, you know, when people say to us, oh, but they have to have a relationship with their grandchildren. I don't think that being a grandparent is a right for a grandparent. Ooh. If they haven't got a good relationship with the child.
You can say that again.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean.
You can't just have a relationship with your grandchild, if you are undermining or undercutting and abusing, or you know, not seeing them as a separate person of your child. So
yeah, it's not a right. You know, just because you are the blood grandparent doesn't mean you have a right to engage with that kid. I would say the same thing about siblings, right? Like if you're an adult and you have an adult sibling who doesn't speak to you or you don't have a relationship with, but then they want to call and talk to their niece and nephew, you know, I think that's a no-go for me as well. If you don't have enough safety and security to build trust within the relationship with me, then why do you want to talk to my child? You know, why do you want to have influence or a relationship that I now have no control over? And if I am going to have any control over it, I have to get in an unsafe situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's really complex, because our children may at some point go on to develop relationships with people that we really struggle with. And that's their business when they're an adult. But I think when people are living in our home, and it's really complex, I think, this stuff, because there's so much pain in it.
Oh, so much. Everybody's offended and hurt.
Yeah, everyone's offended and hurt, and everyone feels so aggrieved and so kind of unable to look at their part often. And I suppose I would say to someone, if they're estranged, that really getting to know what works for them and honoring that is important, and that boundaries can shift as well. And I think that also our own, I guess the proportionality of our story changes as we grow older, and we get a different perspective sometimes, and some things come to the foreground and some things recede to the background. And I've had periods, if I'm really honest, I've got 2 sisters and a brother, and it's very complex when you grow up in a family where you haven't had your needs met, because after my parents died, all of us were undermothered. And so we've tried in some way, subconsciously, to get each other to meet our needs. Mm-hmm. And it's very messy. And I've had periods of estrangement from one of my sisters, because we were really struggling to have an adult relationship. And she had the story that I was like the bossy older sister, and we really worked really hard to move away from that. And I really looked at my part and what I'd done. And I had certain stories about her, but and it's caused me so much pain, like profound pain, which I had to really grieve and kind of just think I'm going to detach with love, because it's really difficult. But then what happened was that my other sister was here recently in London, and we had this amazing dinner together, actually. And because my other sister was there, there was enough relational safety and kind of co-regulation between us that we could keep on coming back to the same conversation and gently looking at our parts in it. And I guess it might be irritating in some sense to them that I'm a therapist, because I'm always trying to teach them things. But I was able to explain something about stress responses.
I'm laughing so hard because I get it. I try so hard not to do that. It's hard not to, you know.
I don't try that hard not to do it. I wanted to explain about stress responses, because, you know, when we go into a stress response, if we just go into fight because we feel dysregulated, that's not going to lead to anything. You know what I mean? There's no relational safety there.
Yep.
We can't learn. But we need enough safety to return and enough kind of compassion. And I think one of the most helpful things we can learn, all of us can learn, is that we all have bad parts. We are all both light and dark. And we don't have to split our darkness off. We can still love our darkness. And I found that really freeing to kind of acknowledge I can be a real asshole sometimes. And I need to love that in myself and take responsibility for that. And so we were able to kind of because I would like to have a loving and warm relationship with her. That's really my intention. But it's not necessarily in my control. But we were able to have this really amazingly adult conversation. So I guess I also want to give your listeners a message of hope that there is always chances that things can shift and change. And we really have to look at, like, be really adult in ourselves to look at, like, what am I contributing to this dynamic?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's hard when you're willing as a person to, to have that maturity and do that work and to be open to that reconciliation at all times. And that's what I would say is people, even in abusive situations with family, it's always important. I look at it like you might have a picket fence with a gate, or you might have a picket fence with no gate, or you might have a stone wall with a gate, or you might just have a stone wall, right? There's all these different types of boundaries. I would hope at a minimum that you can have a stone wall with a gate, and that if your family member comes to the gate and says, hey, listen, I've been to therapy. I recognize my responsibility in these things. I take this responsibility. I see how I hurt you. And here are some things I'm going to make sure to do so that never happens again. Will you give me a shot? Then maybe you talk to them through the gate, and then maybe you crack the gate, and then maybe you move into a relationship. And then you might have to make them move back out the gate and shut the gate again. But you're not putting the stone wall up. Now, if somebody's obviously physically and emotionally abusive in a way that is intolerable and that puts people in harm's way every time, then yeah, obviously there's no letting them in. But that, like you said, those boundaries and those gates shift over time, and maybe you have more resiliency later in life. I know for myself, I have way more resiliency than I did even 2 years ago or 4 years ago. If something would happen with my parents or a sibling or a coworker, I'd think about it, dwell about it, ruminate over it for weeks, if not months. And now generally it can be, a couple days. It's still there and it still bounces off my brain, but it's like I've worked through the tools and the resources, and ultimately I know who I am. I was having lunch with somebody right before I came over for this podcast, and I was telling him, I'm not letting things. One of my big trigger words is unknown. I hate to feel unknown. If I feel like we have a good relationship and I've been consistent, and then all of a sudden you question my integrity out of nowhere, it's extremely triggering, because I'm like, well, so 99 times I did this, and then one time it was a little off, and so you assumed the worst. And that's because of my experience growing up in my childhood. And it's like, I've learned like that's a lot more about me than it is about that person questioning. Maybe they're just questioning, or maybe they're just asking, and maybe it's not this deep-rooted distrust. Maybe they're just like, hey, why'd you do this? And I'm like, what? You questioning my character? Like, ah. And it's like, now I know where that comes from, why it comes up. And I have to take some responsibility in that and go, okay, not every situation that somebody questions something or has an emotion or has a fear that comes up in them has anything to do with this history of consistency or whatever you want to label it. And I think that's the thing we can take responsibility of as people, is like, we all have triggers and we all have irrational thinking that comes up, and we have to be, I love, what did you say? Gentle with yourself, or, what was your phrase?
Gentle with ourselves. Yeah. Very gentle with ourselves.
Yeah. It's like we have to be very kind to that inner child, because that's the person who's actually upset. Your adult self's, doing its thing. But like when that little kid comes up and goes, not again, it's like we have to self-soothe that thing and say, hey, listen, buddy, like, hey, Clint, like, you're loved, you're valued, you're known. And so that's what I was telling my friend at lunch. I said, man, it's so nice to be friends with you, because you know me good and bad. You know everything about me. I tell you the things that I'm bad at, you see them, and you love me anyway. And so why am I going to get triggered by somebody who doesn't even know those things? Why is their opinion going to be heavy if they don't even know me that well? But having people that know you boost that self-esteem, boost that identity. And then you don't need these, even your family, if they don't know you, to validate that inner child stuff.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think for many of us, that first place where we get that mirroring of our bad, like of you're wonderful, essentially, and you kind of, and you're good enough and you're lovable. The first place we get that is often in therapy, actually.
Yep.
And then we can really learn to kind of go look at ourselves and go, oh yeah, I remember thinking, oh, I'm not so bad, actually.
Right.
And kind of shifted to kind of like, oh, you're great. I don't hold on to that all the time, because one of my biggest things is not feeling good enough and around defending against that because of some of the stuff from my mother and when my brother died. But I think that often when that sort of thing happens and I have a big reaction, I have to like think, okay, probably what's appropriate here is like 25% of my reaction. Um,
I like
and
that.
kind of just to go, okay, I'm going to really like downsize everything
Yeah,
and wait.
throttle back.
Yeah, exactly. But I found nervous system work really helpful for that.
Yep.
To kind of do something to put me back into a place of like in Deb Dana's words, ventral vagal, because then you have a much better story. There's like so much hope and possibility there. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I think for my Christian listeners, like, breathing, is so important, getting that breath, the breath of God, the ruach is what the Hebrew word is. And it's like, you breathe and you get your nervous system regulated, and then you ask the Holy Spirit to speak truth in you and go, okay, what's true about me? Who does God say that I am? I'm loved. I'm valued. I'm known. I'm not, my behavior doesn't dictate God's view of me. Christ's sacrifice does. And I think it's interesting, we were talking a little bit before about Christianity, but I think one of the biggest things in Christian faith, when I work with Christians, is I'll say, like, what do you think God thinks about you right now? And they'll say, I think he's probably mad or disappointed. And then we have to tie that back to like parental thing. It's like, no, that's actually, if you're a Christian, not your belief system, right? That's not the theology. The theology isn't God is mad at you or disappointed in you. It's God loves you so much because he sees you as his child, and you don't have to earn that love, and you can't lose that love. But that's a parent thing. That's how you were raised by your dad or your mom, and now you've projected that onto God because of people and how they manipulate Scripture and how our church in the world plays out. But the reality is that so many of those, even our religious views, tie back into our family of origin traumas and issues, and with men and women and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you just said about that. Oh no, what was I going to say? I can't remember what I was going to say, but I think that because God, like, we are always whole in his eyes. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with us. We might have done something that's kind of maybe we've done some bad behavior or something, but that doesn't mean we are flawed or anything. But I think that, like, certainly in my childhood, we went to confession from very young, and that meant going to talk to the priest and confess your sins. From like, you had to do that before your first Holy Communion, and in Catholic Church, your first Holy Communion is when you take like the bread. And so you have to practice confession before that. And I look back on that now, and I think it's horrifying to send children 6, 7 to go and talk about their sins. It's so shaming, and punishing, in my view.
In the wrong context, without the, again, developmental awareness of what all that means, and it being a heart posture, right? It's just a behavior modification. It's just I'm forcing you to go do something. If that 7-year-old came and said, hey, mommy, hey, daddy, I did this thing and I'm not happy about it, that's a great motive, right? That's a great lesson to learn, is like, share with the people that you feel safe with and confess behaviors that you have that. But I get an even a little deeper thing. We're currently writing a book for the church on trauma, and one of the things I've been talking about a lot with friends, and just I haven't talked about it on a podcast, but I guess it's a good time is when I think of confessing sin, I think of not confessing behavior, but confessing heart posture. Confessing, just like Adam and Eve, it's, they doubted God's love for them, and they doubted his security, and so therefore they listened to Satan, right, or the serpent, also lie and say, God doesn't love you, he doesn't care about you, look what you're missing out on. And that heart posture of doubt and fear led them to be, wanting to be God and control the thing themselves. And that's really what I think sin is, and what we should confess to one another, right? Is, hey, listen, whether it's, anger, or I bought something I shouldn't have bought, or I looked at pornography, or I did something that I know I don't want to do and is not in my moral compass, but I did it anyway, is to go to our friends and have our kids come to us as adults and say, hey, I was really feeling unloved today. I was really feeling unsafe today. I got really dysregulated. And because of that, I doubted that God loved me. I doubted that he was going to meet my needs. And so I took that into my own hands. Yeah. Does that make sense?
And that's really kind of, well, that's, I think what you're talking about, there's sort of co-regulation, that you come to me and the parent, whoever, reflects back the essential goodness.
Yes. Like yes, it's so good. Yeah. I mean, it's the psychology of attachment, but attaching to your parent, who is going to remind you that your behavior doesn't determine their love for you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of us were not raised that way, and unintentionally. It's just generation after generation of parents saying, hey, listen, you got to make good grades. You got to look good to everybody else. You got to behave well to everybody else. You got to win the awards because that'll make me feel like I did a good job as a parent.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's internalized patriarchy as well. That kind of, we exist in this capitalist society that says you're only valuable if you've got certain types of jobs. And we also didn't know much about emotions. If you think about this sort of stiff upper lip approach to emotions that comes from this country, from the UK, and that's kind of spread to a lot of the Western world in some sense. That this is how we deal with things. It's like emotions are seen as weakness in some way, or have been seen as weakness. And we're only kind of, again, in the the last 40 years even, really learning how actually listening to our emotions is the seat of our power, actually.
Yeah.
And we can make our choices based on what's going on in our bodies.
Absolutely. It's that weird dynamic of, no, you don't want to let emotions dictate you and control you, but at the same time, they're telling you something very important about, your experience, and that's valuable. I think that's where we see the swing from kind of kids are to be seen and not heard, all the way over to, let your kid feel all their feelings and do whatever they want to and live their own life as a child. And it's like, okay, well, there's a balance there, and it's based on the difference in kids. It's based on the difference in parenting and culture. There's a lot of variables, but it's that polarization is getting us into a lot of trouble. For my boys, it's like, I tell them all the time, like, bud, cry about it. Like, daddy cries, you cry, like you let it out. If you want to be angry and you want to say some things, like, that's fine. At some point, we're going to have to learn to regulate, take a breath, do some things, tap, squeeze a ball, drink some water, go run out in the yard. But especially my oldest, I'm like, you're going to have to start regulating. You got to figure this out. I'm here with you and I'm going to help you, but you can't just fall apart. You can't just lay on the floor and kick and scream. You can do that for a moment. I'm not shutting that off immediately, but we're going to have to, right? Now, my 5.5-year-old, he gets a little longer. And it's like, well, that's based on development. That's based on who he is. That's based on what he needs. And I think parents, they want a one-size-fits-all answer for everything. And it's just not that simple,
It's really not that simple. And I think that that pendulum swing is so interesting, the going towards permissive, because really the children need boundaries and containment for safety. Not just the physical safety, but the containment provides the emotional safety. And it's very nuanced. I think it's quite a hard thing to teach.
Yeah, it's difficult because most of the time, right, what you're teaching is the parent to be insightful enough about their own feelings, understand their own attachment, so that they can be congruent and authentic with their child. Because I think, the brain science shows that one of the most important things is providing that safe environment, that safe connection, which is attachment, right? You ask for what you need and you're going to get that need met without feeling shame. And authenticity as a parent, in my opinion, is one of the basic needs. Is you don't need to be a perfect parent, but you need to be congruent with who you are and authentic in the way that you parent. Because if you're not, then people, your husband, your wife, your children are going to feel unsafe because you're giving them either an aggressive version of yourself or a passive aggressive version of yourself. And all of us, most people read that really well. And if you have trauma, sometimes you read it even more hardcore than other people. So any scent of inauthenticity is like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's like,
yeah. And I mean, I think that the problem is that so many of us have been raised to be inauthentic and not to kind of connect to ourselves. And I think for parenting, the most important thing is actually our self-connection, because we can't connect to our children if we can't connect to ourselves. And I think that, that all those things where you get a script to try and parent your children, none of those really work because I believe that if we are regulated enough and have enough regulation in our systems, we'll know what to do. Mm-hmm. Yes, we need some guidelines and some teaching about some neuroscience and like a model of nervous system healing and things like that. But because often if you say to a parent, how would you treat your best friend? They know how to treat their best friend. And that's just actually how you treat your child, with some more containment and kindness and boundaries. But often mainstream parenting stuff says to treat the child worse than you would treat an adult.
Yes. Yeah, they can't have a bad day, right? They can't have a bad moment. They can't have a preference. They need to be, and I think that falls in what I get really annoyed with in our Christian spaces is the obedience for obedience sake, and it's like that takes the relationship out, which is literally the opposite of the relationship God tried to create, right? He didn't try to create these little robots that follow everything out of just obedience. He wants a relationship. He wants to be with us, and he wants us to feel known and to know him. And if we look at that as a parent with kids, it's like, it's the same thing. Yes, of course, I want my children to love me, and I want them to act in a way that's respectful, and I'm going to have boundaries that does that. But how you apply that means you model that while asking for what you need. Be respectful, be kind, be considerate, take in consideration what's going on for their little brains, take in consideration know your child well enough to assume and be ahead of, right? Attunement, like tune without them having to tell you, because they don't know at 3, they don't know at 4 that they're mad. You know. And so you can meet their needs without them having to say, well, I'm mad that my brother did this thing, or I'm feeling betrayed because my friend did this. Like, you have to give them that language.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the thing about that often, though, this obedience and compliance, is that control is often a way that we've kept ourselves safe. Mm-hmm. And so if our children, if they're not obedient or not compliant, it somehow feels like we've lost control. And for so many people, that stimulates so much anxiety. But actually, like, really reparenting ourselves in those moments to notice why we're needing control, and like obedience for obedience sake, as you said, there's no point in that, because that kind of crushes the child in some sense.
Yes.
But I think that's one of the most important places we can reparent. My experience.
Definitely. I do these little, there's a great book called Habits of the Household. And one of the things it talks about is like the exit prayer, when your kid's doing something and you feel that in your body. And I would add, like, he didn't say this, but I would add like the stuff you did, the reparenting, and then going, what's this bringing up for me? What narrative am I all of a sudden listening to, and what fear am I working out of? And walking in the hall and just going, okay, God, they're just 8. They're just 5. This is the first time they've been 5 and 8 before. Help me to be regulated. Help me to know who I am. Help me to realize I've been here before. This is not new. I know I'm going to go in there, and I'm either, if I say something that I don't believe, or if I think that yelling or raising my voice or spanking them is going to get them to behave, I'm going to be sorely disappointed next Tuesday or tomorrow afternoon or this afternoon when they're right back to doing the same thing, because that's what kids do.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be embarrassed by my behavior, and I'm going to shame myself more. And what, help me with that. And then it's much easier to walk back in the room knowing, like, I've predicted the future I want to have, and I've kind of played through this game, and I've looked at my own self, and I've taken into account, like, my imperfections and the way I act when I'm hungry or I'm tired or I'm frustrated or my wife's not meeting my needs. Like, and then you humble yourself and you can go back in there. Yeah. And again, I don't do that 100% of the time, but I try to do it 7 or 8 out of 10.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, because we are allowed to have a bad day. We're allowed to be grumpy. We're allowed to, throw our t-shirt or something, but we expect often our children to be so much better, but more behaved than adults. And, I love what you just said about going out in the hallway and having a breath. And, I think that takes time to get to that, because often we have to really slow down the movie of what we're actually doing and see how we're reacting, to have a break and things, so we can have a different choice. So I think that maybe some of your listeners might struggle with that, because it takes, have to have a lot of goes past it, and then to see, oh, look what I'm doing. Let me try and change that. Yeah,
I remember the first time my 5-year-old slammed the door. Like, he went to his room and slammed the door. He's like a little bitty turd, going in there and slamming the door. And at the time, I went to like a 20. I went in there. He got in his bunk beds. I grabbed him. I pulled him out of his bed. I put him in the corner. I was like, you do not slam doors. Like, we are not going to do that. And I walk out and I'm just like, I cannot believe he slammed the door. And so then I'm like walking around. I'm like, why is that so bad? Like, my brain starts going into like, why am I actually so mad? And what is actually happening? And, so I go back in there and I'm like, look, buddy, and we do the whole, I'm sorry. Like, Daddy shouldn't have been frustrated with you. And that was the first time where I was like, I had been teaching him like body and consent and body safety and all these things. And I'd been saying, like, don't ever let anybody do anything with your body that you don't want them to do. Do not let anybody touch you. And I had yanked him out of his bed and put him in the corner, and I'm thinking, well, that's incongruent, and I'm trying to like process this thing. But that had just always been like whether it was my mom or my dad slamming stuff, after going into therapy, I'm like, that's why that was triggering. My mom would either like slam the cabinets or shift things around to let you know that she was mad without like saying it or whatever. And sorry, Mom, you do that. And if you're listening,
she listens.
Yeah. And so it's like we've had these conversations, and it's like, she'd be frustrated and washing the dishes really hard or whatever, and I'd go in the kitchen like, what's up? Like, is there a problem? Oh, no, it's fine. And the fine word, and so now, I mean, I didn't realize that, but that was really a big trigger for me because my wife doesn't really do that. She's not passive aggressive in that way, and so. After that, I've just had to work like, okay, like I told him, I'm not going to grab you. I'm not going to put you in the corner. Like, that's not even something I normally do. I just got in that fear space of like, I have to fix this behavior because he can't do this. Right. Yeah. And I know a lot of people listening have had some similar experience, and your kid's behaving in a way, your teenager's doing something, your 9-year-old's doing something, and you're thinking to yourself, they can't do this. Like, if they do this at school, if they do this with their relationship and their marriage, like we start going down the future. Right. Yeah. But a lot of times that has way more to do with how that made us feel or some previous experience we had with that's shaping and informing the crisis that we feel like it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what your point you just made about not predicting into the future, because if we just stay right here, right now, it's just a door slamming now, and it probably felt really good to him to give it like a good whack, and probably discharge some anger for him. But I think that I know that sense of fear that you talked about they can't do this at school, they can't do this. It's like they're never going to have any friends if they behave like this. And I think just staying in that, okay, they're a bit angry now, and I'm going to help them with the processing. Because otherwise we do that catastrophic thinking of like, this is all gone, like just really wrong. And it hasn't really, but our own, like I think the greatest job in parenting is managing our own emotional state and our own journey, and just trying to be as present as we can and just be soothing ourselves all the time. Because honestly, I think it's the greatest learning journey ever, ever, ever. Like the greatest healing opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I always say like marriage taught me how selfish I am, and parenting taught me how much God loves me, because he just tolerates so much from me. And so it's like, if I can have an ounce of the toleration and grace God has for me with my kids, like I'm going to learn so much more about being a good human and being a good husband and being a good person. And I loved what you said, like you wouldn't treat your best friend like that, hopefully. And you wouldn't treat your spouse like that. So look at that same way with how you treat your kids and how you interact with them and how you have patience for it. All great stuff.
And they are such a great gift. I think sometimes because it can be so triggering, we don't like. I sometimes really have to, like, I look at their little eyes when they smile at me, and that really connects you to the divine, that kind of that pure, it's pure love. And so it's almost like we need to have a dose of that every day to really remember what a gift this is actually.
Absolutely. I love that. It's beautiful. Yeah. I remember like my oldest looking at me and loving me and thinking about, this is, he sees me. He doesn't see any of my flaws yet. He was like 2 or whatever. He just sees me kind of like a puppy, they always wagging their tail and loving you. And it's like, wow, like God sees me like my kid sees me right now for this season. Now he knows all my flaws already at 9, but it's like, he still loves me, and that's what I'd remind people too, is if you're a parent listening to this and you have a tough relationship with your kid, they deeply, no matter how messed up it is, deeply want to connect with you and deeply want to repair things. And if you need to repair, you're going to have to take responsibility for the pain you cause, and you're going to have to humble yourself. Even if they've done a bunch of unhealthy things, like the only answer and solution is you to do your own work, and then to go to them, humbly and say, hey, like, I love you. I want to repair this. And I realize it's going to take time. What can I do? What do I need to do in our relationship to change or to modify my behavior so you feel safe and you feel loved? Here are some things I also need, and set some boundaries for yourself. And most children, even adult children, are they long for that. Their behaviors might not seem that way. Their actions might not seem that way. And if they're on drugs or they're in active, spiraling, then no, it's not going to be the time to do that. But if you're out there and you're, really struggling with your kids, your adult kids, your teenage kids, like they want to connect with you. They want to feel safe with you, but it's most likely that you're hurt and you can't see their pain past your pain. And it's your responsibility as a parent to go first, in my opinion. That
Yeah.
you had
I would
them,
agree.
you know, you chose to have them and brought them into your trauma and your history. They didn't. And so it's your job to go first and apologize first and make amends first. And when you force your child to do that, no matter how old they are, then you're abdicating your role. And then that continues the trauma cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, this might sound a bit harsh, but I mean, drug addiction and alcohol, it's always about stuff in childhood. It's always stuff that's come down the family and generational trauma. And so, and often things are hidden and there's so much shame, and our children play out our unconscious and other things that are secret in the family. So like owning things, and taking responsibility and honesty, I think, is like such an important thing. But I would agree with you that it's always the parents' responsibility to make amends with the child. And it's when that's happened, it never happened to me, but when that's happened to clients, it's very, 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 very like amazing.
Oh, it's powerful because you just see, you know, how, I mean, just a little bit of good outweighs a lot of bad. I mean, it's just been my experience clinically, whether that's in marriage or parenting situations or addiction. It's like, it might take a little trust building, right? You might have to practice it a couple times before the kid believes you, but they're wanting it, man. They're wanting to connect. They're wanting to heal. They're wanting to, I mean, even as adult kids, right? We're wanting our moms to scratch our backs and rub our heads and rock us like that. If you have that trauma and you didn't get it, and for whatever reason, it doesn't matter the justification. Like, sure, you had a bad childhood and sure, it's generational trauma, but we're talking about in the moment now. Like, your kid can't repair all that for you, but you can repair that for them if you can get past your pain to see theirs. And I think so many people, like you said, that narcissism, and even if they're not a full-blown narcissist, they have that narcissistic wound to their self. And it's like, they just feel so small and so damaged that they're like trying to fill that void. And they've got to stop that cycle.
Yeah. And I think the thing about the narcissistic wound, that in itself is such a big generational trauma. And so, it's kind of that thing, like once we realize that we're lovable and can take responsibility for ourselves and still be lovable, it's so powerful but it's so scary, I think, because then you have to welcome in your own badness, basically. Which is very hard if you've got a narcissistic wound.
Definitely. Yeah, because your true self you never feel lovable or good enough if nobody knows you. You know, if you don't show people your mess and your weaknesses and have them love you through it, then you're always having that feeling of like, if you just knew, if you really knew me, if you knew this thing about me, if you knew how I struggled with this or thought like this or parented like this, you'd abandon me. And, you know, so then you don't ever let anybody know you. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy of being alone. But lo and behold, you have a real tight community and a friend, and you tell them and they're like, oh, me too. Oh, I struggle in those areas too. Oh, thank God, because I was feeling the same way. Like, I thought I was the only one who did that. And then all of a sudden, now you have connection and intimacy and reciprocation. And you're like, oh man, actually, like this person sees that I shop like this or eat like this, and they love me anyway. And yes, then you ask for accountability and help and support and all these things. And then you find healing and you grow and you know, you're not chasing that affirmation. You already have it, even at your worst. And I think for me, that's what goes back to God, is God saying like, look, even while you were a sinner, like even while you were at your worst, Christ died for you. Like, you don't have to earn it from me. You're not gonna, I'm pleased with you. I can't be any more pleased with you. Like, I'm pleased with you because you're my child. And because of what Christ did, I'm not pleased with you that you didn't cuss this week, or you didn't drink too much this week, or you did or didn't recover from whatever. Like, I love you anyway. It's like my kid running up to me and being like, hey dad, look, I finished the Legos. Don't you love me? You know, I'm like, Grady, no, I love you, you know, because you're my kid, not because you built a freaking Lego.
Yeah. Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, look, I know we're on time, so thank you so much, Cath, for coming on. And I mean, you just had some brilliant things to say and connect with, and it was really good for my heart, my trauma kid heart, to just talk through this stuff. And your vulnerability was beautiful. Can you tell people kind of where to go to follow you on Instagram and your websites and all that stuff?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Clint. It's really been a great pleasure to be here. I didn't realize we had so many similarities.
Yeah, it was great. Hopefully we can stay connected.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram as Cath Counihan, and I'm actually about to redo my website. My website is still psychotherapymum.com, but it'll probably be cathcounihan.com soon. And I've got a podcast called Grow Yourself Up.
Yeah, y'all check that out. It's great. It's all the stuff that you've heard some of it on here, but a lot of good new stuff and different ways of talking about it that I just love. So
thank you so much. And I've got a group program called The Emotional Journey of Parenting, but and I hope to sort of resuscitate that. Some things in my own life have meant that I don't have that much capacity, but I'd like to get back to sort of doing group work like that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah. Well, y'all check her out, and God bless you guys, and have a good week.